This is Daniel Simon at Baton Rouge Community College, and this week I'll have another preview for History 1123 for the fall semester. If you go back to, of course, the previous weeks we had before, we did start in week 8 with the French Revolution and Age of Napoleon. This will kind of continue into another assessment that we'll have, of course, for that period. We do have, starting in week 9, Monday, October 14th, I do have some lectures you need to watch on the 19th century, 19th century Europe, mostly parts 1 and 2. This goes into the period of kind of like post-Napoleon Europe, where we kind of talk about what happens in France after the French Revolution. I also kind of go into what also happens in Russia. You get the Russian Empire, which kind of starts to decline, and this, of course, will affect Europe in a certain way, where it'll lead to the rise of some of these new nations that come about, like Germany, especially. So the rise of nationalism will kind of follow later as well. So this will be assessed in a second exam coming up. These two lectures, because that's going to include like the part 1 and 2 lectures right there for the 19th century. That'll also be included with also the French Revolution and Age of Napoleon lectures, but those will not be assessed until week 10. The reason for that, of course, is because there's fall break coming up. So don't forget about that at the end of this week. We do have fall break starting, which will be October 10th and 11th are the dates for that. I will have another assessment, which will be for extra credit, which will be kind of bonus video quiz number 1, where you have to watch a documentary, which this documentary will be on the Franco-Prussian War, which occurred in the late 19th century. That was, of course, a famous war that was fought between what was the Second French Empire of Napoleon III and, of course, the Kingdom of Prussia, which was at that point starting to form into the German Empire. So that's kind of an important assessment because it's, a chance for you to earn extra credit for it. So it's probably going to be the last major assessment I'll have for the semester because, we have midterms coming up. And I'm not really going to have any other major assignment that'll be due until after that. So I don't really give midterms, of course, for my classes like History 1123. But I do have a upcoming makeup period I'll kind of announce later in Canvas, where students can make up assignments they missed, which that'll be just the first few Canvas quizzes that we have in the first exam. So those are the only ones you will be able to make up. But I'll have an announcement later in Canvas about that. That's forthcoming. Then in week 10, Monday, October 21st, I'll announce the second exam, which that'll be posted in Canvas quizzes, which I told you will be on the French Revolution, Age of Napoleon, the 19th century. And that'll be due probably sometime in late October, maybe even pushed further back into early first week of November. But like I said, that will be on those topics I just told you about, French Revolution, Age of Napoleon, and up to the 19th century, just those part 1 and 2 lectures overall. Don't forget you can turn in your study guides for those sections that you have in Canvas from this particular study guide right here. I think the only ones you need to turn in for this one will be the French Revolution, Age of Napoleon, and then also the 19th century part 1 and 2 will be fine to turn in for the extra credit. Also, when I announce that assessment, I'll go ahead and put up another lecture for that same week in week 10, Monday, October 21st. I do have one more lecture on the 19th century. I have part 3, which will be on the rise of nationalism and imperialism. I kind of go into that subject where a lot of the European powers, I think the United States, even Japan, get into like imperialism throughout the world. I also talk about the rise of nationalism because you get the whole unification movement where Germany unifies, Italy unifies, and this does have an effect on Europe and the world later. I guess it leads into, of course, rivalries within the imperialism that happens in the 1800s. Also leads into what's later World War One, which I'll get to as well today and talk about. So you'll have to watch that lecture. Now, that lecture will be later assessed with upcoming World War One lectures, which will be posted to week 11 that I have. Those are right here. I won't post those until Monday, October 28th. But that goes into the different lectures that I'll have, of course, for World War One. And it's like I made a little mistake right there, wrong announcement there. Sorry about that, but I'll fix that later. But that lecture will be in two parts. Part one, which will kind of go into like the early background of World War One, which will be like the causes of World War One, and then go through some of the early conflict up to about 1916. I'll kind of especially talk about how the German Empire, attacked France, and that really caused the war to spiral and expand. We also get into like what happens with Russia as well later. And then the part two lecture kind of goes into how the Russian Revolution breaks out within the Russian Empire in 1917. Talk about how the United States enters World War One as well. And then I do kind of go up to the end of the war, and I do talk about also the Treaty of Versailles, how the war kind of is finalized after the conflict ends. So those are the lectures for it right there that you can see. And like I said, these lectures will be assessed in a Canvas quiz number 5 with the part 3 lecture on the rise of nationalism and imperialism. So those are the we'll go with that right there. And there's that Canvas quiz, number 5 I'm talking about. That might be one of the last major Canvas quizzes that we do have for the semester. But don't forget about also, discussion questions. I do have discussion questions, of course, posted throughout, in modules. And, of course, you can go into discussions as well to look at that also. And that's kind of a preview of what's coming up through weeks 9 through 11. I will talk about later, we will have, I guess from weeks 12 up to like week 16, I'll have other lectures that'll kind of, end the semester that I've got. I know later on we'll have like the rise of fascism between world wars. I'll talk about like the rise of Mussolini, Hitler, etc., and that leads into World War II. So I have the World War II lectures. Then, of course, I'll have also the Cold War era as well. I think that's pretty much the last lectures I'll have for the semester. But we do have upcoming assignments due. Don't forget, your book reports. That's something you still should be working on right now to kind of wrap up for the semester. Those are due in November. Also, don't forget about those vocabulary assignments. You still got to do the first 3 for the semester. Just kind of remind you about that because those will be due by finals week. You do get extra credit for turning in assignments early. I think the vocab and the book report, I think you get it. I think I want to say plus 10% bonus for turning in assignments early before they're due. Same thing with study guides also as well. So if you've already kind of made up your mind about, the book you've already chosen and, you pretty much don't want to change books, don't worry about that. But if you don't like your book, don't forget you can change books, but it's starting to get kind of late for that. If you have, already started close to that, due date. So anyway, that's it for the preview on this. If you had a comment, of course, about the course, anything about what's going on, do let me know. Of course, via my email. You can see my email, of course, above. Of course, don't forget they have Canvas discussions. You can, of course, ask questions, comments, of course, during the semester. Remember, you do get bonus points for that. Sometimes I do try to add some, Canvas discussions in there or something like that, questions. But don't forget about that overall. So that's it for right now. But like I said, you should have assessments right now that you're working on. I guess the first exam pretty much is out the way, which you can make up later. But I know they have Canvas quiz. I think it's number 4 on the rise of the British Empire. I know that's the main thing you should be working on right now as pretty much assessment overall. So that's it. Of course, and I'll see you later.